What's going on YouTube? Rylan here in the garage gym, and I should have done this video a long time ago, but I want to talk about a squat rack buyer's guide today. So this video is for anyone that hasn't bought a squat rack yet or is looking to upgrade their squat rack or power rack, however you want to say it. And I'm going to go over what I've learned over the last year, basically training with all sorts of different types of racks, using them and seeing the quality, that type of thing, and what I've learned. So I'm going to share that with you today. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, I just walk around my gym, review equipment that I've bought, and give you guys tips and tricks and feedback from my experience. Everything I tell you is just my opinion. Again, it could change, I don't know, but I try to give you guys the best honest feedback that I can. I don't take any money to do the reviews. I don't do free equipment reviews. So everything here is something that I bought, and I try to give you some feedback on it. So we'll talk about power racks today and buying your first power rack or upgrading a power rack that you have. And first of all, do you need a power rack or a squat rack? What does it even do? There's one behind me right here, and I have people that follow me that have not bought one yet. They do street parking type workouts, and they're probably questioning, why do I need a power rack or a squat rack? All a squat rack really does, I mean, at the end of the day, they look pretty fancy, they get pretty crazy, but it just is a place to hold your barbell so you can train particular lifts, especially anything to do with squats, overhead press, bench press is another good one. And its whole purpose is to give you a spot to hold your barbell so you can perform the lifts and do your training on it. Obviously, barbell lifts are some of the best lifts that you can do in your training. They work very well. They have for a long time. So having a squat rack gives you a really good ability to get a full body workout in and be able to do that from your home. So a few fringe benefits that you might get from having a squat rack is something like a pull-up bar, like I've got on this one. I've got a couple different pull-up bar options. So that's another nice benefit. It also gives you the ability to attach maybe some rings to it or some sort of element that you can use as a base fixture to then put on your attachments to train with. Okay, we're going to start the series off here with quality. So I'll just touch on quality a little bit and kind of give you some of my feedback on it. And oftentimes, one of the biggest regrets that I get from followers is they'll tell me, I bought a cheap Amazon squat rack and I regret it. And I agree with that. Your squat rack is sort of the main point of your home gym or your garage gym. It's going to be there for a long time, probably the life of your gym. And if you buy the right one the first time, it's something you won't have to upgrade. So my recommendation is, if you can afford it, try to save up and avoid buying the really cheap racks off Amazon or Walmart or anything like that. And the reason I say that is you will immediately kind of put yourself in a corner and not have the ability to add attachments to it or upgrade it or expand it, as opposed to buying a industry standard 3x3 rack with either 5/8 holes or 1-inch holes. The ones on Amazon tend to have odd spacing. They tend to have odd sizes, 2x3, just some weird stuff. So they don't really work well for expandability. And like I said earlier, that's my number one complaint I get from people. They wish they had bought a better rack from the beginning. So, okay, so we're talking about, I'm just gonna give you a brief overview on quality and list a few companies' names. I'm probably gonna forget a ton of them, so I'm not gonna get too far into it. But if you're looking for a very budget-friendly rack, I would recommend Titan over the Amazon brands, okay? So I don't normally push people into Titan, but if it means you can get yourself into a 3x3 rack, definitely buy Titan rack. They're not going to be the best, but it's going to get you at least into an industry standard type of rack. Now, an example of sort of a mid-tier power rack company is going to be something like Fringe Sport, Valor Fitness, Fray Fitness. The two big ones right now in the country are Rep Fitness and Rogue. I put Rogue and Rep above a lot of those other names that I listed off, and the only reason I say that is Rogue has been making power racks for a very long time. They're the leader on all this type of equipment, and Rep has finally caught up to Rogue standards and maybe even surpassed it in a way with their welding technology. But both Rogue and Rep use robotic type welders. They have very good quality in terms of their welding. So those two I would put above a lot of those other Chinese import companies, only because of they do a lot of in-country engineering. They use their own proprietary systems and engineering processes. So now if you want to go to a higher end company that makes racks, you're going to be looking at a lot more money, but you're also going to be getting racks that are handmade. Okay, so these are racks that are going to be like companies from Sorinex, Irwin Fitness, Oak Club, Williams, Ghost, and Colorado Strength. That's just to name a few. I'm sure I missed a lot of companies out there, but just to give you an idea of kind of how the companies stack up for quality. Let's talk about what color to pick and the differences in the finishes. So when it comes to racks, especially when you're looking at some of the bigger names or some of the custom racks, you can pick almost any color you can think of. They will tend to always be a powder coat finish, and the difference is that something you can think about when you're ordering your first rack or ordering your rack is if you go with a standard black powder coat, which is what I have here. It's a matte finish. It has a bit of a texture to it over, say, a smooth semi-gloss or satin finish of the colored ones. Is attachments that roll on your uprights are going to be a lot smoother on a colored rack over a textured matte rack like I have. So I would tend to steer people into a color if they can, only for that reason. Now, in terms of durability, scratches, scuffs, the lighter colored racks, the white ones, the clear coats, that type of thing, those are going to be able to hide a lot of those scratches a lot easier than, say, the darker colors like black or dark blue. They're going to show the scratches more for sure. You can touch up the paint on all of them, no problem. And a couple interesting finishes that are very rare but quite nice is the stainless finish. And then Rep and Rogue also offer a clear coat finish, which is just basically, as it sounds, it's just raw steel. Sometimes the steel has been either polished or maybe it's been cleaned up a little bit, and then they just put a clear coat of paint over top of it. Some companies, again, offer the clear coat finish in their accessories, like their benches and some of their attachments, so you can match your gym to make it work. So when you pick your colors, think about also not only just your power rack, but also matching your benches and your accessories, your racks, your storage racks, and everything else. Most companies now, especially the custom ones like Oak and Irwin and some of those guys, will offer almost unlimited color options on almost everything they sell. So that's a nice advantage going to a custom rack company. All right, so another common question on racks is import steel versus domestic steel. And two very good examples would be companies that import their racks from China are going to have uprights like this one I'm holding in my hand right here that are measured at 75 millimeters. And what I'm talking about is the actual width of the square tube. Now, companies like Rogue and all the custom domestic builders in the US anyway are a true 3x3. What does this mean for you? So how does this affect your purchase? Well, it affects it in one way for sure, and that is if you buy an import rack, one that is 75 millimeters, it's 1 millimeter smaller than 3 inches. So what does that mean? That means that you can install any attachment from any company on a rep rack like I have behind me. These are from Rogue right here, and these fit my rack perfectly. You cannot go the other way. So if you buy a Rogue rack and you want to put a rep attachment on a Rogue rack, it will not fit. It can fit, but it might require modification. You might have to shave down the UH&W, you might have to change the you're going to have to do something unless you get very lucky. But from what I've found and all my followers' feedback have told me is they've tried to put rep attachments on their Rogue rack and they've been either very tight or they have not fit. So if you go with an import rack, you have the advantage of using any attachment from any company and it should fit no problem. Now, there's some very small limitations to that, and that comes into play with the hole spacing here. So, of course, on an import rack, these holes are not going to be quite every 2 inches because they're in millimeters again, and then on a domestic upright, the holes are going to be a perfect 2 inches. So if you have an attachment that has a hole here and a pin maybe way down here at the very bottom, the holes may not line up. In my experience buying countless and countless of attachments, I've never had that problem. So, but it's worth mentioning to you. So that's the difference between import racks and domestic racks. That question comes up a lot. Will this fit my rack? One more thing also to touch on when you're buying your uprights is 1 inch versus 5/8 holes. Those are your industry standards. Now, what does it matter? In the big picture, it doesn't matter a whole lot. There's plenty of accessories for both 5/8 and 1 inch holes. What direction is the industry going? In my opinion, the industry is heading towards 1 inch hole attachments. So if you are buying today and you can afford to pay a little bit more for a 1 inch hole rack, maybe that's something you might want to consider. Personally, it's a lot to do with looks. 5/8 racks are plenty strong enough. I would put them up against any type of weight that we're using in the gym here. And if you look at the guys back in the day, West Side and all those guys, they're using 5/8 racks and they are lifting way more weight than you and I or anybody watching this channel. So 1 inch looks cool. Obviously, I went with 1 inch. I liked it because of both the looks and the attachment selection for it. All right, so let's talk about the different types of squat racks. And we'll just start at the very basic and work our way up. The most basic squat rack that you can buy is a basic stand. And what a stand is just basically one set of uprights and a wide base on the bottom. They're very minimalistic. They work fine. They aren't going to be the most stable, obviously, but in a pinch and in a very small workspace, they'll work. So I said work like 3 times there, but anyway, you get the idea. So that's where you would start with a squat rack. I'm not even sure if that would qualify as a squat rack technically, but that's kind of the starting point of something to hold your barbell, really. From there, the next step in terms of size is a fold-out wall-mounted rack. And I like these a lot because these are really cool. They make a lot of sense. Basically, you mount it to the wall and your uprights fold out. You use quick pins to hold them. And you now have a very small squat rack coming off the wall. When you're done your workout, fold them back in, pull your car back in the garage if you're working in your garage, and it didn't take up very much space. Those are a really nice option. There are a couple caveats. I'll tell you one thing to watch out for. If you get a wall-mounted rack, make sure, or try to fix the issue, but make sure your concrete's flat. Because what I've heard and what I've found from people is the first time they went to swing out their uprights is their garage floor sloped like this. One upright wouldn't go all the way out and the other one's floating, an inch in the air. So if you're going to use a wall-mounted squat rack, just make sure that you put it in a level place or try to shim it or adjust it. But something to watch out for when you're mounting it for the first time. So from there, we can get into a thing called a half rack. And a half rack is a very shallow 4-post rack with a front area. So you're going to be doing most of your lifting outside of the uprights, sort of in front of it. And they tend to have one tall upright and then sort of a shorter, less tall upright as well. They're different. You can get them from different companies, but they call them a half rack. I like them. They don't take up a lot of space. They're a nice option. I don't think they're that common anymore as they used to be. I think most people are going to the next step, which is going to be a standard 4-post rack. And this is the one that I recommend for most people. And the reason is it doesn't take up a lot of space. It works really well, and it gives you all the functionality of a power rack in a somewhat compact space. Now, if you do go to a standard 4-post rack, just be aware there's a good likelihood that you're going to want to bolt it down to your concrete. All right, so from a 4-post rack, we go to a 6-post rack, which is what I have right behind me right here. And why buy a 6-post rack? Well, the biggest obvious reason is it gives you a place to store your plates. And you'll see this a lot in commercial gyms, college gyms, any type of pro sports gyms. The racks will tend to look like this one. And the reason for that is when you're moving plates every single day training, or you have lots of people training in a commercial gym, it just makes sense to have your plates within a few feet of where you're training as opposed to on a plate tree, on a wall, or anywhere else. We train 7 days a week here. I'm always training, always moving these plates. So the ability to have your plates close to the rack was worth it to me. It's not something you need, and it's definitely not something you have to have. Now, one other benefit to a 6-post rack is it gives you a longer footprint. Regardless of what depth you choose, it's going to be long enough, and with the weight of the plates, you tend to not have to bolt it down. So there's 2 advantages to going to a 6-post rack. The disadvantage is you're now taking up a much larger footprint. So if you're in a small garage or a small home gym, 6-post rack, probably not going to be the one that you want to get. It probably won't make sense. Just have your plates on a plate tree right beside your rack or nearby. All right, so this brings us to the 8-post rack. And if you've been following the channel, you know that I had an 8-post rack in here for 3 months or so, and it's gone now. We're back to the 6-post. And the reason is the 8-post rack, in theory, I thought it was going to work to allow different people to work out at the same time and do squats and everything else so my wife and I could train. In theory, it sounded good. In practicality of using it for 3 months, it just was not working out the way I wanted. Hey, to each their own. That's the fun about garage gyms, is we can try different things, change things around, go crazy, go extreme. It doesn't matter. It's all about trying stuff and seeing what works for your space, because some people might have an 8-post rack right in the middle of their gym and can train on both sides of it, off the back side. In that particular case, I think it actually is a good idea. So again, just didn't work for us, but it's not to say it might not work for you. Okay, so we've covered a lot on power racks. Let's talk about depth and width. This one is a little bit subjective. I'll talk about depth first. Now, before I recommend a depth, I always ask, what configuration is your rack? Because that's the first question that I need to know. People ask me, what depth should I get? Now, if you are in a standard 4-post rack, I'm going to lean towards recommending a rack that's 38 to say 41 inches long. And the reason is, wider's better if you only have 4 posts. It just is going to give your rack more stability. And I'm still recommending you bolt it down, but wider's better on a 4-post rack. Now, let's go the other way and say, I've got a 6-post rack, or I want to buy a 6-post rack or expand to a 6-post rack. What depth should I get for my working area? The one behind me here is a 30-inch depth. That is my recommendation. That's my favorite depth on a 6-post rack. The reason I say that is 30 inches just, to me, the sweet spot for tons of room, but not too much room. Doesn't take up any extra room in your garage or in your home. Now, I tend to like to bench in the front of the rack myself, so that's just a personal thing. It's not necessary, but I like to be able to bench out the front of the rack and then do my squats and overhead presses inside the rack itself. So 30-inch depth to me is the sweet spot, especially on a 6-post, but to each their own. You know, that'll be something you'll have to make a decision on based on what you want to do. All right, so let's talk about width. So width of the rack. Believe it or not, rack companies make their racks in different widths. I know it's annoying. Why can't it all be the same? I have no idea. But Sorinex, Rep are two that make their racks 47 inches wide versus Titan that makes theirs 48 inches wide versus Rogue who makes theirs 49 inches wide. So there's a difference there of 2 or 3 inches. Now, other rack companies might make their racks different. Now, the majority that you're going to see in the industry is 49 inches. Now, what's the disadvantages or advantages to the width? There's a couple advantages to a 47-inch wide rack, like this one here behind you. And number one, it takes up a little less space in your gym. So very minor amount, but it's still an advantage. That's the first thing. The second thing is it gives you more clearance between your plates and the uprights when you're re-racking your bar. That's a second advantage. And the third advantage to going to a 47-inch wide rack, if you have roller J-cups, it's going to give you 2 or 3 inches more of adjustability in your bar when you're setting up. So there's 3 advantages to going to the 47-inch rack. Now, what are the advantages of, say, a 49-inch rack? 49-inch rack is going to give you the advantage of more clearance to your hands on the barbell. So you can reach out wider on the barbell without hitting the edge of the upright. That's one advantage to a 49-inch rack. The other advantage is most commonly found cambered specialty bars tend to be about 47, 48 inches to the collars and are very tight to rack on a 47-inch rack. So if you're buying specialty cambered bars like most of us, the 49-inch width tends to be better. Rep, however, has solved that problem with their new cambered bar. It has plenty of clearance and fits a rack like this one very easily. But it's worth noting those are the differences and something to think about. Let's talk about height. This is another good question. What height rack do I get? Common issue is ceiling height. So first of all, measure your ceiling. I mean, that's as high as you can go. So if you have a ceiling that's 85 inches high, you're going to get an 80-inch rack from Rep or from someone that's got a shorter rack. Now, if you have unlimited ceiling height, then you have more options. The rack behind me right here, this Rep PR 5000, happens to be 93 inches high. I'm 6'2", and this height works really well for me. So here's my recommendation, is a rack between 90 and 95 inches is going to work for the majority of everyone out there. I don't see any reason to go any higher than 95 inches. To me, it's just not necessary. And especially if you have people that are shorter, like your wife, or maybe your kids want to work out on your rack, having a 100-inch rack or 110-inch rack, they're not going to be able to reach the pull-up bars, and that would be a major disadvantage in most gyms. If you're talking about what safeties to get, because I know when you order your rack, it's going to ask you what safeties do you want. Now, the 3 basic types are the pipe safeties, the flip-down side safeties, and strap safeties. So, well, there's one more, and it's right here. Spotter arms. So there's actually 4 different types of safeties, and I'll tell you what I use. I'll let you figure out what you want to do, but for bench, I like to bench outside the rack with spotter arms. Really simple. I leave them set up. I know they're set up for me, and I don't have to change them around. For squats, I tend to prefer the strap safeties, just because if you do bump your safety on a strap, it's not as it's not as abrupt as hitting one of the flip down safeties. Now, that being said, there's some advantages to the flip down safeties. They're great for rack pulls, and they're really good for overhead press work because you can actually press straight off the safety itself. So pipe safeties, I have used them. I'm not a fan, only because adjusting them is a bit of a pain, and it's just not something that interested me when I purchased my rack. I've used them before in commercial gyms and never been super happy with them. That's just me. They work fine, and they're a great budget option. So, all right, that concludes the squat rack or power rack buyer's guide. I know it's a good long video. It's a lot of details, but I hope for anyone out there that is looking to buy their first rack, this will help them understand all the little details and questions that you might have. Please put your comments below. If you have any further questions, add them and let me know, and I'll definitely try to get back to you and try to answer those. And if you're new to the channel or you've been following us for a while, again, appreciate your support. Only subscribe if you find this information helpful. And again, if you do, check us out on Instagram. We share a lot of pictures from our gym on Instagram. And if you want to support the channel, the easiest way to do that is like, subscribe, and use the affiliate links that we have down in our description box. So that's it. Appreciate everyone, and have a great day.